Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Koen Bona. I'm working for Wageningen University in research, and it's an honor for me to present a presentation about a subject that I'm really passionate about and really like to talk about with you. It's about sustainability and about more sustainable food production. And in this presentation, I will hope to show that developments in Europe around improved transparency will help to make food supply chains more sustainable. And I'm working as a researcher for Wageningen University and Research in the Netherlands. I'm also active in a lot of initiatives, global initiatives that work on transparency of food, transparency around sustainability. And in this presentation, I will also share some of my experiences working on those initiatives. I will immediately start with my main message of my presentation. So I think I already worked for about 20 years around sustainability and making supply chains more transparent. But I think that in the last 1 or 2 years, the game is really going to change. And the reason for that is that transparency around sustainability was in the past or currently something that you could decide about on a voluntary basis. So you could decide if you want to have a label on your product, an organic label or a fair trade label. You could decide to have sustainability information on your website or a sustainability report, but it was all voluntary. And you could decide yourself what kind of indicators to use and what kind of methodology. What I see happening now in the last 1 or 2 years is that both from the government side, from the financial sector side, and from the retailer side, all those organizations expect transparency around sustainability for all food. So that's one change. In the past, it was voluntary. Now everybody should report about the sustainability of the food production. And the second change is that they prescribe impact indicators. And with impact indicators, I mean indicators like total water use, total greenhouse gas emission. So indicators that really measure the impact of your effects. So in the past, it was more about, do you have a sustainability plan? Do you have a sustainability manager? So more about the organization, but these indicators really measure what's the effect of what you're doing. So in what kind of impact results. Now, this kind of reporting is expected on company level, on product level, but also in more from the financial sector around investments. So how sustainable are investments that you make. The big initiator behind it is all the discussions around the greenhouse gas emission and the Paris Agreement. But it's not only relevant for greenhouse gas emission, but also for a lot of other sustainability issues. I already told you the retail, the government, and the financial sector is are the reasons behind it, because they ask for information. I don't have the time to discuss them all, but we'll go a bit more in detail around the developments in the retail and around developments in the government, the European Union, but also individual European countries. And then I'll go a little bit more into detail on example of eco-labeling in the Netherlands. Now here you can see a lot of initiatives that popped up in the last years that all have the intention to show the sustainability of products to consumers. So the idea is that all food items that you can buy in a supermarket, for example, get a score from A to E, from very sustainable to not sustainable at all. And in that way, it's not a voluntary issue anymore, but all products should report. And those methods or those initiatives are based on methods that measure impact, as I just described. So that's also a change. They take the full life cycle into account and using life cycle assessments. And I'm not sure if everybody is aware of that term, so I try to explain it in this slide. So with life cycle assessment, you look at over the full life cycle of a product. So you start with minerals, for example, that are used for the production, then on farm level, then the processing of the product, the transport, the consumption, and the recycling of packaging, for example. And over that full life cycle, you look at what kind of resources are used. So what kind of land, energy, water. But you also look at the emissions over the full life cycle. So is there any effect on the soil, on the air, or on the water of the full production process? And in that way, you can calculate the impacts of a product in a very systematic and scientific way. Now, all those methods, all those initiatives that you show here, all use life cycle assessment as a base to measure sustainability of food. Now, several retailers in Europe have already piloted these systems, and in some cases also implemented over all the food categories. And in that way, they help consumers to make comparisons between product categories. So you can, for example, see how meat compares with a meat replacer, but also within a product category. So I want to buy an apple. What is the most sustainably produced apple? And in that way, consumers can much easier take sustainability into account in their decision making. Now, nearly all methodologies also base themselves on a methodology that has been standardized by the European Commission. It is called the Product Environmental Footprint. And within this methodology, not only climate change is taken into account, but also 15 other impact categories. So that in the end, it gives a full overview of all the environmental issues that are relevant in that particular, for that particular product category. Gives a complete overview of the total environmental impact. Now, at Wageningen, we studied these developments and we looked at all those different initiatives, but we also spoke with a lot of stakeholders, with retailers, supply chain partners, and governments, label owners. And based on that, we tried to generalize the conclusions around this development. And we think it might have quite big impact because it's available for all food. It's a broad set of environmental issues taken into account. The method can be used for continuous improvement. So every time you improve one of the 16 indicators, it's clear for your clients and for consumers. Can use for both business to business communication and business to consumer, and within and between product categories. There are also some issues that still need to be solved. So currently it leads to quite a big workload for companies to report. So a lot of data has to be assembled throughout the full supply chain. Also, assurance methods have to be set. So to check that what companies are reporting is also really the real data. There are still some methodological issues to be solved. And also the incentives have to be set, so to stimulate companies to produce more sustainable production, for example, by paying a higher price. But taking all the advantages and disadvantages into account, we think it can have quite a big impact. There's also critics on this development. So the Norwegian Consumer Agency looked at a similar initiative for the clothing industry. So it was not on food, but for clothing, but also based on life cycle assessment. And they concluded that reporting of this average environmental impact could be misleading. And therefore, they also forbid to use that type of communication on the Norwegian market. It was a different case, a different industry, but still it's something to keep into account. And then also there was critics from environmental NGOs around the product environmental footprint methodology developed by the European Commission, because some of the NGOs say it's not complete enough and should be improved before it's used for consumer communication. Now, that was all what is happening on the retail level. Also on the government level, a lot of things are moving. A big progress is made on making sustainability of food more transparent. My first slide is mainly about activities of the European Commission. So the European Commission developed a Green Deal, as they call it, to make European Union more sustainable, not only on food, but also on a lot of other issues. But food is a large part on it. And what they're doing in that initiative is first that they, in next month, will announce how this product environmental footprint, so this methodology that I just described, will be used in policy making. Will it be something mandatory that all food producers should use, or will it be on voluntary base available, where subsidies or taxes be related to it? Then the second important policy development is that the European Commission wants to develop a food labeling framework, not only related to environmental issues, which is the PEF, but also related to nutritional and social issues. Now, a third policy development is that the European Commission decided that all the 50,000 largest companies that are based in Europe should report on a yearly basis around the sustainability of their company. The European Commission is currently setting standards for that. The concept versions are already available and you can look at it. And it's a quite extensive set of indicators that you should report on. And you should also arrange assurance, so to have an accountant check that the data is all correct. Next to those general indicators, they're also working on sector-specific standards for agriculture and food and beverages companies. And those 50,000 companies are expected to start reporting for the first year in 2024. A fourth development is corporate due diligence. So all companies in Europe are expected to check for social and environmental risk in their supply chain. And if they find significant risks, they should address those risks and try to find a solution for them. Now, last development is a global development. So it's not the European Union, but on global level. So the International Financial Reporting Standards Group that sets the financial reporting guidelines, so how to calculate profits and the balance sheet, has started to work on a sustainability set of indicators. And normally it works like that most countries in the world adopt those guidelines of the International Financial Reporting Standard into the national regulation, so that nearly in every country in the world, these instructions on how to report on sustainability will also be integrated in national laws and will be more or less the global standard. Now, also in some countries, interesting developments are happening. So in France, the French government decided that from 2023 on, so already in a few months' time, the government will introduce an eco-label in France, which means that all food that is sold on the French market should use that eco-label and should report how sustainable or environmental sustainable the product is. You can either use an advanced life cycle assessment method, but also for SMEs, there's a more simple way to report around the sustainability. But everybody is expected to do so if you sell products in France. Now, the Danish government is doing something similar, but only concentrating on greenhouse gas emissions. And they're also a few years behind France, so I don't expect it will be on the market in the next 1 or 2 years. But afterwards, it will also be mandatory on the Danish market. And then the last example I would like to give is about the Netherlands. So I'm chairing a group in the Netherlands that is working on an eco label for the Netherlands. It will not be a mandatory label. It will be a voluntary label, but by bringing all players from the Dutch food supply chain together, we expect that most of them will use the system. We're just starting, so it will take a few years before it's fully operational. And within that process, we are also trying to find cooperation with other European countries. So we wrote a joint proposal to the European Commission for financing. And then if that is awarded to us, we can work together with France, Spain, and Germany on setting up such a eco-label, so that also on the Dutch market, environmental information is available for all food. And we do that in close cooperation with also with other private initiatives, like the ones that I showed on one of the first slides with the Eco Score and the Planet Score. Now, labeling is important, and I think the kind of labeling that we're currently working on in Europe creates new opportunities, because it's available for all food, and that means that also information on the total bill of consumers can be given. It can be used for gaming, of trying to convince consumers to buy more sustainable food. They can have systems on green points, true prices, and all kind of financial incentives could be linked to stimulate consumers to buy more sustainable products. But in making supply chains more sustainable, we should not only trust on the consumers. I think it's also important that information is shared from the farmers to their clients, to business, business to retail, business to finance. There are already several examples in the financial industries where companies get a discount on interest rates if they have a minimum level of sustainability. And also in the business to government situation. The government is also a big buyer, but also because it can be a base for subsidies and taxes. So it's important for communication to consumers, it's important for communication within the supply chain, but it's also important that those supply chain partners act on the data, that it's not just measuring for measuring, but can it be used for creating the right incentives to act on the data. So therefore, it's also important that there is transparency around the use of sustainability data by all stakeholders. And in my opinion, it's especially important for retailers. Retailers can play a big role in making supply chains more sustainable. They can stimulate consumers to buy more sustainable products, but they can also stimulate producers to produce more sustainable products. And therefore, I'm working together with the Dutch government on a reporting standard for retailers, so that it's also clear for Dutch retailers how they act on the data and how active their role is in making both consumption and production more sustainable. Then my last slide with the conclusions. So labeling based on impact measurement becomes scalable. It was already on the market for a very long time, but because methodology was not standardized, because data was not available, it was not a scalable method. But currently it can be applied to all food. There are still challenges, but all over Europe people are working on that, both in the private and public sector. So I expect that those challenges will be solved. And then this could be a real game changer, especially if it's combined with transparency around the use of the data and if the right incentives are provided. So that was my last slide. Thank you for your attention.